On what day was that? Monday. Was it Monday? Oh, by the way, your Depression era pictures. Go ahead and turn those in. I'll come by and you can throw them in the box. Hopefully you paid attention to directions, used all the space provided. Why are you going to turn yours that way? Knucklehead. Okay. Make sure your name's on it. Yes, Josh. Yes, Caden. Yes, Lahayam. Thank you, Cam. Thank you, Owen. Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Jade. Huh? Why not? What little space at the end? Is there a little bitty space at the end? Oh, you mean that one at the end of the... Nah, it's fine. But you did anyway. Look at that.
Right, that's Marley's.
Oh, that Marley's? Ugh. Honesty. Run, go get it. So you don't have two of them. All right. Thank you. All right. So Monday we didn't do a whole lot. We did actually watch this little video, the John Green crash course in history, the Great Depression, and what did we learn from that? Yeah, it's not the stock market's fault. If you're going to blame anybody, blame who or what? The banking industry, the banking system. It just fell apart because there were no safeguards. There was no regulation. And even today, you see people that argue for regulation by the government. You see people who argue against it. I think there has to be some sort of regulation in every industry, or we have things happen like 1929, 1930s, that sort of thing. So, what was life like during the Depression? Well, my dad has spoken to us from the grave, and my daddy said, what? Does anybody remember? We didn't know we were in a depression because things were so bad for people in Georgia. My daddy was the norm, particularly for farmers in Georgia. They didn't have anything anyway. But by 1932, there's somewhere between 12 and 13 million people unemployed. What was the unemployment rate? Does anybody remember? 25%. You want to know what the unemployment rate is today? Anybody know? Anybody keep up with that sort of thing?
It peaked at it was around 3% before COVID. When COVID hit its worst, it peaked around like 12 or 13%.
Okay.
I believe now it's like 6 or 7.
6.2% as of today. That's about 10 million people. You can see how the population has grown. And actually, honestly, that's pretty much the norm. Somewhere between 5 and 7% is what our unemployment rate typically runs. As Caden mentioned, when COVID hit, unemployment rate skyrocketed. That's kind of normalized itself. It's kind of equaled out. 3%, that's pretty good. In fact, that's an excellent unemployment rate. Why would people be unemployed today? Okay, that might be a health issue, might be an education issue. It might be they're in an industry that's dying, and so they can't find a job in that particular industry. Is there a certain amount of don't want to?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there is in every society. Let's let society take care of us. But 1932, people wanted to work. There were just simply not enough jobs to go around. 9,000 banks across the country. Why did banks close? Okay, but why don't they have enough money? I mean, don't banks have money? Okay, they put it somewhere else. They made bad loans, right? They invested. The bank invested. What happens to the stock market? It crashes. You know, $16 billion is lost, or 16 billion shares are traded. Was it 16 billion or million? Million. Are traded, and a lot of losses are incurred, and banks lose money. But 9,000 banks. Why do banks close? Simply because there are no safeguards to keep them from closing. You know, back in the day, if you had $1 million in the bank and your bank closed, guess what? Your $1 million is gone. Let's use $100,000 because that works better. Your $100,000 is gone. Today, if you have $100,000 in the bank and your bank closes or your credit union closes, you're going to get your money because it's insured by the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, a federal agency that insures deposits up to a certain amount. And it used to be $100,000. I think they actually increased it at some point in time. If you have $100 million or $1 million today, should you keep it all in one bank? No, you need 10 different banks to ensure that your money is safe. Should you leave it in the bank anyway? No. Invest. Yeah, you could stuff your mattress with $1 million in $1 bills. $1 million. I would want to see it just once in $1 bills. I stood at the U.S. Bureau of Printing and Engraving in Washington, D.C. I stood next to $60 million in $20 bills. So there was glass about that thick between me and that. I want to go on the day they give samples, but I haven't been able to catch that day. Yeah, it's a lot of money. So, well, no, we were actually watching where they print money, and they had it on a big pallet. It hadn't been cut yet. $60 million laying around. Yeah, not worth what it used to be. So 9,000 banks in the country closed. There are 31 in Georgia that failed. How many counties are in Georgia in 1932? 159, same numbers there are today. Did every one of those counties have a bank? No. And so when we look at it that way, when we look at it just on the surface, 31, that's not bad. But when you look at the fact that not every county had a bank, some people would have to go to an adjoining county to go to the bank, and 31 of them fail, that number becomes a little more significant. It becomes a little bigger number. And you look at the urban areas, Atlanta, Savannah, Augusta, Macon, Columbus, they probably had more than one bank. But little podunk towns like Milledgeville probably had one, maybe two, if they were lucky. Two, because you want competition. And I think here you had the Exchange Bank of Milledgeville and the Merchants and Farmers Bank, which is no longer here and been here for a long time. And neither one of those closed, thankfully. But around Georgia, you did have banks fail. And what happens when a bank fails? Lose all your money. What happens to those loans that the bank held? Now, this might be the good part of it. If they fail, can they demand that you pay them back? No. That's the only good thing that came out of the bank failures. Yay! Now, we said that'll never happen again, right? 2008, what happens? It happens again. Why does it happen this time?
Somebody said that something would happen, and then because he said that, it did.
It happened. No. It happened for the very same reason it happened in 1929, 1930, the early part of the Great Depression. Banks failed in 2008 because they made bad loans.
Too much credit buying.
People were buying too much on credit. And back in 2007, 2008, 2009, I could get out the paper, the Union Recorder, on Friday and turn to the classifieds. And you would find at least 2 pages, sometimes 3 and 4 pages, listing where houses had been foreclosed on. The bank wanted their house back. Do banks want houses? No. But what happened is people bought too much house. They took out a loan they honestly couldn't afford, but the banks were giving it to them. And what they discovered as they investigated is you had loan officers who were given loans that never should have been given, at least not in the amounts that they were given. You know, mom and dad both working, mom and dad, combined, maybe they make $200,000 a year. It's a lot of money. But what happens when mama loses her job? And maybe half of it, might be more than half in some cases, is suddenly gone. And that $400,000 house where your house payment was $3,000 a month, you can't afford it anymore. And what happens? The bank comes and gets your house. They throw you out of your house. It has been foreclosed upon. And it was scary because people I knew, their names would show up in the paper. Fairfield Mortgage Company has sued blah, 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 based on a mortgage given at blah, 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 blah. It's scary. It really was. Hopefully, we say that'll never happen again. Could it happen again?
It will happen again.
It will, because unfortunately, a part of human nature starts with a G and ends with a D and has read in the middle of it. What? Greed. Why do banks make those sort of loans? Because they want the money. And people will do things when they become greedy. They do things that maybe aren't ethical or maybe even aren't legal. And the end result is a lot of people get hurt. So we talked about Hoovervilles the other day. Remember, those are those shanty towns that were built by folks who had become homeless, and you found them everywhere, particularly in large cities. Saw a picture the other day of one in New York City. Central City Park had become a huge Hooverville. You could see the New York City skyline in the back. Hoover blankets were newspapers. I don't think I put that on there. Hoover flags were empty pockets. Who did they blame? They blamed Herbert Hoover.
They didn't even blame
No, it's Hoover. It's Herbert's fault. And remember, there is no safety net. You lose your job, you're just out of luck. Unless you can find another one, you're in trouble. Because there are no government safety nets in place. There is no unemployment insurance. There is no federal welfare system. And so who's it up to? Anna loses her job. Who's going to take care of her and her family if they need it? Government's not. Who is? Maybe her church, maybe the rest of her family, maybe she's got great neighbors that have the ability to help her out, and so they're going to help her out. But what if she's not in that situation? Or maybe she lives in a community that can't afford to help. What happens? Out of luck. She might starve to death. or she goes digging around through trash cans. By the way, did you hear one of the things that Herbert Hoover said? What? Nobody. Well, at least nobody starved. And he was wrong. There were people that died of starvation, malnutrition. Which, I mean, starvation would not be the cause of death listed on the thing. It would be malnutrition. They might be eating, but they're not eating the right sorts of foods. It's like, I've got a friend that when he was in college, all he ever ate, because it's all he could afford, was Kraft. No, it wasn't even Kraft macaroni and cheese. It was Kroger brand macaroni and cheese. It wasn't Walmart. Walmart wasn't around then. It wasn't a big thing. And there were people that were eating cheap, easy to get food because that's all they could get. Or they weren't eating. There's a great book, and you heard it mentioned the other day, called The Grapes of Wrath, written by John Steinbeck, and it is Depression era. And there's a character, and this is kind of gross, but I think it speaks to the humanity of people and how grace-filled they can be. I can't think of a better word. There's a character, interesting name. Her name is Rose of Sharon, and she's pregnant. She gives birth. Can't remember if her baby dies. I don't think he does. Maybe he does. But anyway, after women give birth, their mammary glands, jump start, and they produce milk, right? Well, Rose of Sharon and her mother are in this barn. It's raining cats and dogs, and it's a place they just happen to find to get in out of the rain. Nobody lives there anymore. But while they're there, they discover this emaciated, weak man. He is literally starving to death. And here's the gross part. Rose of Sharon actually suckles the man. He allows the man to drink from her breast. And it sounds terrible. It's gross. But what did it do? It did. It saved his life. And that's how desperate people were. That is an accurate, I don't know that really happened, but that's a picture of the desperation that you see during this era time, during this period. And John Green talked about that. He said, the pictures. And that's why I had you look at the pictures. Some of those were really gut-wrenching. I mean, you looked at them and you went, wow. I mean, my favorite picture in there is the black woman holding her child. To me, that's just a sweet picture. But then you got this picture of this woman. She's got, 2 or 3 children in the background? And it's just utter desperation. She's thin. At least 2, yeah. And, that picture tells you more than I ever could, like John Green said. And John Steinbeck's book, there's we'll talk about it, but there was what was the name of that? Writers' Progress. They employed out-of-work writers to go around the country and interview people. They interviewed former slaves that were still alive. They interviewed people who were in the throes of the Depression. Anna, tell us your story. What was life like for you 10 years ago? Something like, and people would tell their stories, and these writers would record it. Did a couple of things. It documented history, but it also put people to work, right? Put unemployed writers to work. But they were doing art, and they were doing they were taking pictures. A lot of the pictures we see from the Depression era, people are being paid to go out and take those pictures. And there are thousands and thousands of them in the Library of Congress and in the National Archives that you can access online. I mean, it's really fascinating to see what was going on in different places. So Anna is going to have to find her a soup kitchen to eat. Who's going to be running that soup kitchen? The church, maybe the Shriners, Maybe the Masons. Who knows? But some charitable organization is going to be reading that. Local governments. It's not the federal government that is trying to help people, because the feeling was that's the state government, that's the local government's job. It's not the federal government's job. And again, Herbert Hoover's fault. Schools, now be honest, okay? I know what the pat answer is. Yeah, we enjoyed last spring. How many of you really enjoyed not being at school? A couple of you? For how long? How long did you enjoy it? Pretty much the whole time? It's because you didn't do anything, right?
I enjoyed it until spring break, and then we realized we weren't coming back.
Yeah.
And then I was like, this sucks. I want to see my friends.
Exactly. There are schools around the country today that have yet to go back to school. I have people that I know all over the country I'm friends with that teach, and they have not gone back to school yet. They've been doing virtual since last March. And one of the problems is exactly what Liam said. I want to see my friends. They're concerns about the mental health of children who have not been in school. Not necessarily from a learning standpoint, but from a relational standpoint. We are. I mean, I enjoy being alone, and I think most people do, but for about 2 days. And then I got to see somebody. I got to talk to somebody. I like it when my wife goes away, because I can sit around the house in my underwear. Well, I do that anyway, but, I can, this is on film. I can eat what I want to. I don't have to clean up until she's coming home, But, after a couple of days, I'm like, dang, it's lonely around here. It's just me and the dog, and he doesn't talk. Not anymore. He used to, but he's old. So anyway, but during the Depression, schools would have to close entirely. They couldn't afford to pay the teachers. They couldn't afford the building. Or schedules would be shortened instead of 180 days, which I'm not sure. Back then it was 180 days, but whatever the schedule was, it would be shortened just to save money. And again, talked about my dad. We're suffering enough before Black Tuesday, October 29th, 1929, before things really got bad. That they didn't really acknowledge that there was a depression because they had already been living in one. All right. So whose fault was it? Herbert Hoover. Is that fair? I think that was a question that we asked under the causes and effects of the Depression. Was it fair that Herbert Hoover was blamed for the Depression, for all the ills of society? No.
But it happens to pretty much every single president. When something goes wrong, like the thing is, the president works with his team, with Congress, with the American people.
Yeah, supposed to.
I don't think Herbert Hoover did enough, but he's one man, and they see the government policies.
Yeah, in a vast bureaucracy. Jimmy Carter. Now, Jimmy Carter will go down in history as probably the worst, if not the worst, then probably the second worst president that's ever lived. And part of it was he was an outsider. He didn't know how to get things done in Washington. But a lot of it was he inherited a lot of problems. And who got blamed for it? Jimmy Carter. I mean, we had just come out of Watergate. That wasn't his fault. Some of the repercussions from that were his fault.
The general public did not really have any sort of trust in any political person.
No, we did not trust our government at all. And then Jimmy Carter comes out and he says, basically, it was a speech, and it basically was, we're not as good as we used to be. Face it. That's what he said. I mean, he didn't say it that way, but basically that's what he said. And that didn't help him. But gas prices were astronomical. The Iran hostage crisis. Inflation was unreal. When Karen and I got married, we got married in 1983. And that's 3 years into Ronald Reagan's first term in office. Home mortgage rates were 19%. Today, they're about 3.25%. And we thought, we'll never own a home. Because who can afford 19% interest on, $50,000, $60,000, whatever a home cost back then? And then fortunately, interest rates came down and we were able to buy a home. But whose fault was that? Jimmy Carter's. Yeah. What's going on at the U.S.-Mexican border right now? Unaccompanied minors are flooding into the United States. Whose fault is that? Not Jimmy Carter. If he were the president, it'd be his fault. Whose fault is it? It's Joe Biden's fault. Not Donald Trump's fault anymore. Had it happened last year, it would have been Donald Trump's fault. Now it's Joe Biden's fault. Right, wrong, whatever. The president is always blamed for bad things. Okay? But presidents always do what? They always take the credit for good things. One of my favorite presidents is Harry Truman. Anybody know about Harry Truman? He dropped the atomic bomb on Japan. He had some nerve, I'll tell you. But Harry Truman, there's a picture of him sitting at his desk, and right in front of his desk, there's a sign, kind of like that W.J. Usry sign, that says, "The buck stops here." What's Harry Truman say? I'm responsible. It's me. And far too many presidents have kind of taken that attitude. So anyway, what happens after the Depression? Really not after the Depression, but during the Depression. You've got a Hooverville. How many of y'all have campers? You like to camp? Okay. You know when camping became a thing? During the Depression. If you look at, I think one of the pictures in your packet had a campground, and you could see campers, and you could see little houses that had been built. But RVing became a thing. Full-time RVers. Who would have thought in the 1920s, 1930s? Anywho, so what happens? The New Deal comes about. Why does the New Deal come about? Because you have a new president. And America turns to FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, to end the Great Depression and return America to economic prosperity. What is his platform? What is his promise to the American people? I will fix it. I will end the Great Depression, and I will give you jobs. I will return America to economic prosperity. Okay? Yeah, it's Hoover's fault. I'm going to fix it. Did he? Based just on what you know, does FDR fix the Great Depression? Does he end the Great Depression?
Historically, yes. All of the credit is always given.
I think you've been reading the wrong history. Because historically, no. What does end the Great Depression?
World War II.
World War II ends the Great Depression. Now, FDR was president, so again, he gets the credit. But what a lot of people don't realize is he's president from 1932 till 1940, 8 years, 2 terms. Is that right? 1932? Yeah, that's right. I can do math. Okay. He's elected for that 3rd term, right? And serves until 1945. He dies in 1945. But 8 years, and things aren't all that much better. The unemployment rate hovers around 15, 16%. I think the lowest he ever got it maybe was 13, and I think it was higher than that. So these new deals do one thing. 4-letter word. They give people hope. He's doing something. It may not be fixing things, but life is better. Okay? So Roosevelt does eventually deliver on this promise, but it takes this World War to crank up America's economy, to put it back into motion. And fortunately, we don't have a repeat of World War I. Okay, the economy continues to be strong after the war. Again, Hoover is blamed simply because he's the president. Was he at fault?
Kind of.
Kind of.
He didn't do much.
It would be like Herbert Hoover did this, okay? Imagine that you are the economy. And for some unknown reason, you pick on Aniston and you physically assault her, you beat her, you pull her hair, you call her names, and I stand over there like Abraham Lincoln and just watch. My feeling is, it'll take care of itself. Aniston will either die or she'll kill, but it'll take care of itself, right? What's going to happen? Aniston's either going to die or she's going to kill the other 13 of y'all and walk out the door. What am I doing? Nothing. I'm just letting it take care of itself. Yes.
Well, I mean, the thing is too, like the majority of the fundamental economic policies and ideas that we go by now for capitalism, the free market, and even socialism, Marxism, they weren't around during those times. So a lot of really smart economic people shared the idea that the economy would just help. And I'm not trying to justify Hoover because he didn't do enough, but I mean back then that wasn't an uncommon ideology.
Yeah, the economics, modern economics, was just coming into existence. Theories were coming out. Quite honestly, nobody knew what they were doing. Based on an economy that was that large in the free market system, nobody really knew what they were doing. And they thought, because it had happened in the past, they thought, well, the economy will correct itself. That was a theory. The economy is going to correct itself, and it had in the past. But you've got this snowball. You ever seen the snowball rolling down the hill and it just picks up everybody and that's what's going on here. It's that snowball effect. You couldn't stop it. Once it's put into motion, you can't stop it. And again, I mean, look at FDR is coming out with the New Deal, and then he comes out with a New Deal. And I'm not so sure he didn't come out with a New Deal. But he is constantly trying to fix the economy, and he can't do it. It takes World War II to fix the economy.
I'm not sure if you want I mean, you can actually pull out solvent.
No, and I mean, you look at Roosevelt, he has 12 years to fix the economy, and it's only in those last 4 that it's fixed, but it's fixed in a horrific way. World War II. 32, FDR is elected president. Again, the first of 4 terms that he will be elected to, dies before he can finish the 4th one. And if you want to see a man who aged in office, look at FDR. He smoked like a freight train. He had polio. He contracted polio at the age of 39. Went from being an incredibly robust, healthy outdoorsman to a man confined to a wheelchair, paralyzed from the waist down. And to give you an idea of his physical strength, he could walk. He could walk. They put him in braces that locked his legs, and he walked like Frankenstein. And he always had somebody, he's always holding on to somebody. But just the physical strength that it took to wear those braces and to walk is pretty incredible. FDR probably would not be elected president today. The reason would be what?
Physical.
Physical. He was disabled. And regardless of what Americans say, I don't think they're ready for a disabled president. Why? By the way, Roosevelt hated it.
Because, I mean, the typical picture that people want America to be represented by is this big, strong, masculine type
Yeah.
figure.
You know, healthy, not weak. And if you can't stand up, then you're obviously weak. So it'd be difficult. I shouldn't say he wouldn't be elected. It'd be very difficult for him to be elected. You never saw Roosevelt appearing in public in a wheelchair because he didn't think that's what the people wanted to see. And they didn't. They wanted to see their president healthy. So he hid it. But anyway, he's elected president in 1932. His campaign promises, his platform is, we will act immediately. I will act immediately. My first 100 days in the presidency, I will act, and I will put all the government resources at use to end these hardships that we live in. One of the things I think it's important you understand about FDR is he truly cared about people. He truly loved the people in general that he served. And we'll see, Roosevelt spent a lot of time in Georgia, and we'll see how he spent his time in Georgia. It's pretty interesting, actually, to see what Roosevelt does. He's at Warm Springs because he considers it to be therapeutic. The warm water, the mineral water, seems to ease his aches and pains, and he can exercise in that water. Yes.
There's a picture I found in that war photograph book, and this is a black soldier in the United States playing the accordion, and he's like,
Yeah.
it's like FDRs Platform being very cool. It's a beautiful
Yeah.
picture, though.
Yeah, but Roosevelt loved people, and people loved him. And it was genuine. It was not, I'm doing this just to get elected. He honestly was concerned about what was happening to people. You know, and sometimes you'll have a president and he says he cares about people, but in reality, he doesn't. And it might be that he's never been around real people. FDR actually made a point to spend time with people who were just regular people. Of course, his program is called the New Deal. And the New Deal gets a lot of attention, justifiably so. It really does some positive things and it does some negative things. Some of those negative things are long-lasting. Some of the positive things have been long-lasting. In Georgia, well, wait a minute. We got a picture first. Herbert Hoover on the left, Franklin D. Roosevelt on the right. Married to Eleanor. Eleanor. Whew. She was a strong woman. She had to be.
One time she snuck out of the White House and her and Amelia Earhart went door riding to Baltimore.
They probably went drinking in Baltimore, but
It's pretty cool.
yeah. Eleanor Roosevelt she and Franklin are married. It's not a very warm, fuzzy marriage. FDR probably was unfaithful to Eleanor on more than one occasion. But I think that might be a prerequisite for being president. I'm not sure. I shouldn't say that. But many, they had their vices, I suppose. But she actually became the first female ambassador to the United Nations for the United States. She did a lot of pretty cool things, and she worked very closely with FDR, especially on his social programs. Hoover, just a dyed-in-the-wool Republican. Looks like a Republican, doesn't he? But then again, so does FDR.
Now it look like politicians, old white men.
Old white men. So there are 4 programs that we'll talk about regarding Georgia. And they have a tremendous impact on Georgia. And in many ways, they still impact Georgia today. The first is the Civilian Conservation Corps, or the CCC. And what you get is an alphabet soup of federal agencies. So the CCC, its purpose is to put young men to work, young men who are unemployed. The CCC puts them to work, conserving the nation's natural resources, soil conservation out in the West, tree planting where deforestation has taken place. They improved and actually built national and state parks. How many of y'all camp? Josh, I think you said. Who else? Okay, you ever been to A.H. Stevens State Park? Or Vogel State Park? Or Cloudland Canyon State Park? Those are 3 parks that were actually built by the Civilian Conservation Corps. In fact, if you go to A.H. Stevens, which is actually at the home place, the former plantation of Alexander H. Stevens, they have a huge watchtower. It's used to look for forest fires. It's built by the CCC, and they actually have some of the cabins that those workers lived in while they were there. But incredible public works program, put people to work. Some of the things that it did in Georgia, it improved Kennesaw Mountain National Battlefield. I mentioned Cloudland Canyon State Park. I mentioned Vogel. I mentioned A.H. Stevens. And it actually helped construct the Appalachian Trail. Now, the trail was already there. What the CCC did was they went in, they cleaned it out. They made some improvements. If you've ever been on the trail and you've climbed up stairs that have been miraculously built, those were built by the CCC. Or if you've ever spent the night in a little shelter on the Appalachian Trail, that's a CCC construction. Men are working. In exchange for working, they're got a place to live. They're getting fed, and they're paid. Now, they're not paid an awful lot of money, and most of it, quite honestly, is required to be sent back home. Why? So the families can eat to support their family. After all, you're hanging around with, 200 other guys. You're living in a CCC camp. What are you going to spend money on? You're going to take your boyfriend out on a date. I don't know. There's the purpose is to get money back into the economy. And how do you do that? You get families where they can actually spend money. The second of these programs is called the Agricultural Adjustment Act, or the AAA. Agricultural products, like a lot of other products, have been overproduced. And so somebody came up with the bright idea to pay farmers not to grow stuff. So if you had been planting 1,000 acres of soybean or 1,000 acres of peanuts, rather than planting 1,000 acres of peanuts, we're going to let you plant only 250 acres, and we're going to pay you for the other 750. What does that do to the supply of peanuts?
It drops it, but the farmer's making the same money that he would.
Yep, probably making more money.
So it's stimulating the farmer, but it's not hurting the overall supply.
The supply goes down. What happens to price? Goes up. Demand goes up because supply has decreased. And so it was actually a pretty good idea. I don't know how well it was appreciated by farmers, because what do farmers want to do? Want to grow stuff.
They want to do their job.
And and actually, I think well into the 80s, maybe the 90s, that farmers were still being paid stipends not to grow stuff. And it probably wasn't good for the economy. The third one is rural electrification. The Rural Electrification Administration, or the REA. 1935, 3% of Georgia's farms had power. My daddy grew up on a farm that didn't have electricity, didn't have running water. And I doubt if anybody in Jackson County had electricity and running water that lived on a farm. By 1950, 90% of Georgia's farms have electricity. Why? Because people took out loans, organizations took out loans to create membership corporations. And I'll finish that tomorrow because y'all are obviously ready to go. All right, thanks.